everyone, this is Catherine O'Connell and welcome to Lawyer on Air. If you are looking for inspirational stories about women in law, then this is the podcast for you. Join me and my lawyer ladies as we enjoy a glass of wine after a hard day at work and talk about the world of women in law. I hope you will enjoy getting to know these amazing women who I am so proud to share a profession with. I'm glad you're here and I hope you enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode in season 2 of Lawyer on Air. I'm Catherine O'Connell. Today I am joined by Pavitra Iyer, who is a multi-jurisdictional transactions lawyer with over 10 years of experience in leading law firms in both India and in Japan. 8 of those 10 years were spent with one of the top 4 Japanese firms, Morihamada and Matsumoto. Pavitra completed her undergrad Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Pune. Pune is the 7th biggest city in India with just over 3 million inhabitants. Pavitra developed a love for corporate law during her postgraduate days at the London School of Economics and Political Science, where she graduated with a master's degree in corporate and commercial law in 2005. Pavitra is admitted in India and is also a solicitor of England and Wales, in addition to being a registered foreign lawyer in Japan and a member of the Dai Tokyo Bar Association. From 2006 up to 2010, Pavitra was based in India, and she worked in the Mumbai office of AZB & Partners, which is one of India's best known and prestigious law firms. Pavitra has been in Japan the last 10 years, having relocated to Tokyo with her family in 2010. She studied Japanese in Tokyo for a little over a year, and in 2013 joined Morihamada as a foreign law counsel. Pavitra's areas of practice are mergers and acquisitions, private equity, corporate compliance, and general corporate advisory. Her core work involves advising clients on various aspects of cross-border investments. And in Japan, this advice is largely taken the form of advising Japanese clients who are investing into India and overseas. Pavitra also advises on local compliance matters and other queries that arise in the context of doing business in Japan and India. Not only using her legal skills and expertise, but Pavitra also leverages her first-hand knowledge of Indian culture and the related nuances that come bundled up with doing cross-border business. So with this duo of cultural and legal savviness, Pavitra helps her clients successfully implement their business needs. And Pavitra also does volunteer work with me on the Executive Committee of Women in Law Japan, and most recently appeared on the panel about mentoring women to become effective leaders in Japan. And I know this is one of her passions. Being a mother to an active 4-year-old, Pavitra tells me very clearly that in her spare time, well, her spare time is actually a novel concept and mostly a fond memory for her of the past. But on the occasions that she can take time out, she loses herself in a book or music where she becomes blissfully content. Well, Pavitra is another super example to anyone listening that you can do a lot with your legal career, pulling out your unique cultural and language DNA to excel as a lawyer extraordinaire. I'm really and truly pleased to bring you Pavitra as my guest today. Pavitra, welcome to the show.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for having me on.
And today we're going to talk about your career path, how you navigated your studies in London, you mastered your foundational black letter law experience in India and your decision to come to Japan. And we'll talk about your passions, your exciting next career. And I'd love you to offer up some gems of advice for young lawyers on their career path. How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, today we're online, but if we were going to be meeting up in person, and I hope we're going to do that soon, where would we be? Do you have a favorite wine bar or cafe or restaurant that you like to go to? And what would be your choice of beverage off the menu?
Ooh, so, Catherine, if this were before, the pandemic days, then I would probably just tell you to pick the place because I just love exploring new sort of bars, restaurants in Japan. And, I would just go to a lot of new places. And I think my favorite drink would either be a dry red or a dry white, depending on what I'm eating. And now, of course, with the pandemic and also being mother to, a 4-year-old, there's this little Italian restaurant really close to where I live, which has some wonderful al fresco sort of seating options. And that's usually where I just hang out nowadays. It's called Bagus. And it's actually become my new favorite now, I think.
Oh, lovely. Maybe we can meet up there very soon and
sounds wonderful.
Have a coffee, or if it's later in the day, we can have a dry red or white, depending what's on there.
That sounds wonderful.
Yay. And I'm trying to think back too to where we officially met. Do you remember, was it maybe Women-in-Law Japan evening event in Ark Hills, Roppongi, in around 2019? I think it was an exec committee meeting.
Yeah, it was. I think we had an exec committee bonenkai. And it was a really nice dinner. And I think so we had probably sort of bumped into each other at Village events before that. But I think that was the first time we actually spoke to each other and sort of, got to know each other a little bit. It was not very long ago. But since then, of course, I've worked with you so closely and, seen you pretty often on the Village sort of meetings. And, it's just been wonderful getting to know you.
Sure, that's right. Because I think after that end of year party, we had the beginning party, New Year's party in January 2020, and then we all went online. And so, yes, it's true.
Yes,
I've gotten to know you a lot more over these last couple of years. So that's really great. I thought I had pinpointed where we first met. I wanted to now go back, Pavitra, into your career, but let's just talk a little bit about your early days. And I'm really interested, and I ask everyone, as I think what they wanted to be when they were a child. How about you?
Catherine, I wish I had a very inspiring story for your listeners about this, but okay, so I come from this very sort of traditional Indian family where there's a lot of focus on the sciences. And, we were 6 cousins. We are 6 cousins in my family. And it was just an unspoken sort of understanding that we would be a mix of doctors and engineers, because that's pretty much what everyone in my family is. I was kind of, just following the lead and going along with the flow. And I signed up for maths and science in my A levels. And I discovered that I'd not sort of received that gene somehow.
Right.
And yeah, it was really challenging. And there was nothing else that I had thought of becoming, because this was always what I was sort of, taught from childhood, that, science, mathematics, medicine, engineering. So at that very sort of important time in my life, when I had no idea of what I wanted to do, I had this really nice English teacher in school. I used to be pretty active in all of this, extracurricular stuff like debating clubs, drama clubs. I used to love things like that more than I loved the academic part of school. And she actually suggested law to me as an option, because her son had just gone into one of India's top law schools. And that kind of set the ball rolling. And, I decided to take an entrance examination. And that's when I got into law school, and the rest just sort of, followed from there. But it actually was something that I was led to at a very late stage in my life, and not something that I was, sort of interested in from the beginning.
So when your English teacher suggested that, did you go away and start looking up what law was about? Did you have something else that you were continuing to do to get that interest, or did you just really take it on board and say, that's for me? And how about your family? How did they react?
Oh, that's an interesting story. So I have always loved reading books. And, I used to read a lot of Arthur Haley's and, I think by that point, even John Grisham. And that, of course, there was your introduction to what a very exciting legal life could be like. I knew that you'd have to leverage your sort of language skills at that time, it was about language. And so the entrance examination covered, language, it covered logic, there was basic arithmetic, current affairs and things like that, all of which I was interested in anyway, because I used to love to read. And like I said, I was doing mathematics at the A levels. And so when I looked up the, requirements, it just felt like, it could be a very good, an option for me. My family, on the other hand, was not super excited about me wanting to be a lawyer. We have great law schools in India today. But even back when I signed up for law school, there were maybe like 4 or 5 really good universities. because of, Bollywood, which is one of our,
Right.
sort of main offerings to the world, law had always been portrayed as kind of a villainous profession in Indian films, and there'd be the cops trying to do the good deeds, and that there would be these lawyers trying to foil everything in court. So no one had a very sort of a good or a very wholesome, and when I say no one, I mean no one in my family had a wholesome sort of, impression or approach towards the law. But I think when they then found out about the school I wanted to go to, and of course the University of Pune. Pune is an old, very old, it's a university town, and it's actually called the Oxford of the East. And I think getting into a good law school, and combined with the fact that I was pretty stubborn and not willing to listen to anything they had to say, they just had to let me go away to law school. And that's actually how it happened.
Right. Well done. I had a look at the internet and the pictures of the university, and it does very much look like a very English looking school indeed. And so you finished up there and then went to London to study.
So I finished up there. And so it was 5 years of law school. And I actually did about 2.5 years of kind of like training, kind of like,
I see.
Yeah. And so this was when I wasn't sure what I wanted to specialize in as a lawyer. So when I was in university, I had done a fair bit of volunteering for some environmental NGOs, and I was very involved in sort of the social justice side of law. And I wanted to go into litigation. Corporate law was never something that was even, it wasn't something I'd considered seriously, because it was all about making changes in the best way that I could do them. And my experience with these NGOs, really, the environmental NGOs, when I was a student in law school, I got to see people, just using nothing but their time, and, just to just try and effect these changes at such micro levels, which would in turn lead to these bigger changes in society. And I thought that I could probably do that best being a litigation lawyer and making these small incremental changes, which would then, lead to bigger effects in society. But reality, when I did my 2 years of training, was actually quite different from my expectation. Because being a litigation lawyer in India is not, it's a slightly different animal than being a litigation lawyer outside. It's still very much like a closed club. And I think that you need some connections. You probably need a godfather. You need to know people to actually break into it, to get into a good chambers with, a good senior lawyer, and then be trained on the job. And it was when I was doing this training that, one of the partners in that firm actually told me to look at corporate law as an option. And I still remember him telling me that corporate law is, a great career option for women lawyers. So why don't you look at that? Doing my research on that, I realized that I wanted to study a little more, because what I had learned in law school wasn't enough to prepare me for a job in corporate law. And many Indian lawyers tend to gravitate, for higher education towards the UK for obvious reasons, common law and everything. And I always wanted to study in London. And so I applied to just a few law schools, and they were all like London based. And when I got into the LSE, of course, I just grabbed that opportunity, and that's how I went there.
Right. Amazing. I mean, what I'm taking from what you've already said is you've had two people in your life very early on who were very influential. And I think that's really a great point, because we should listen to people and what they say. I mean, not everybody perhaps says something that is worth taking on board, but you've had two people right there early on who've directed you, sort of guided you, given you little hints to what you would be good at, right?
Absolutely,
the English teacher and this male partner telling you about corporate law and that it's an excellent career path for women. Really, really interesting that you've had that in your early stages. Of course, that was significant for you, wasn't it?
I think it was life-changing, Catherine. I mean, They literally set me on the path to where I am today. When you put it that way, I realized what big sort of, moments those were in my professional life. Yes.
Especially since also you weren't doing what was traditional in your family. And that takes a lot of courage.
Call it courage. Others would call it being stubborn, but I think I'd go with courage. Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, you went over to London. How was that? Did you have more of a deepening in your interest in law as you were there? And it must have been an amazing environment to be in as well.
Oh, it was. I would easily put that as the best year of my life, that period that I was in London. It was my first experience living abroad. I'd, of course, traveled a lot before, but I'd never actually lived anywhere overseas. So that in itself was such an enriching experience, And the LSE, it's right in the middle of the financial heart of the world. And my professor, so I actually learned corporate law with Paul Davies, who wrote The Authority on Company Law, Gower and Davies.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes. And he was also my guide for my dissertation topic.
Goodness.
And my love for corporate law started there. And then it just sort of just exploded, It was wonderful. And I think the people I met, the friends I made at the LSE are friends today. And they've traveled to see me. We've traveled back and forth to meet each other, been at each other's weddings. And it's not just what it did for me professionally, but also I think the personal sort of friendships that I formed, which, I carry with me very closely even today. And also the other great thing that happened to me there was I actually met my husband while I was studying.
Here it is. Here's the story.
Yeah, there's the story. So interestingly, I actually had met him before through a common friend when I was in Mumbai before I went to London. But we actually got together in the UK. He was a shippy. He was in the Merchant Navy. And so he was doing a course somewhere up north near Scotland. And I was in London, just went for a weekend trip. It was a great weekend.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's life-changing. And so how long was that course? Was it 2 years?
My course was a year, but I went there, just a 1-year course, but I was there for 3 months before. And then I stayed until my convocation, which was in December. So my entire stay would have been a little over a year and a half.
Right. And do you have like a graduation ceremony and did family attend that if you have that sort of thing there?
Yeah, we did. Okay. And it was just me. I was there for my convocation with all of my closest, my tribe, my friends, the people I was really close to. And it was just a wonderful experience. We did not throw our hats up in the air.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, that was something we did not do. But I think, we did a mandatory, sort of celebration after, and it was just wonderful.
I often see those and think, how do they all find their hats again? Because normally you have to return them back to the place, right?
The
rental company.
You do. But I don't think we did that.
Okay.
It was still wonderful. Anyways, yeah.
Wow. And then was it soon after that you returned back to India?
It was my dream to work in London, and I wanted to go the training contract route and, sort of get into one of the Magic Circle firms and work there. But then when I met the guy who I pretty much knew I was going to marry at some point, and him being a shippy and the nature of his job sort of dictated that, I relocate and I go back to India because it just made things logistically easier for him to, sort of join the ship and deboard and, sort of be in India rather than waste time applying for a visa to come to the UK. And, that was one of my biggest considerations for deciding to return to India. Although I did sort of follow my heart, I also did think about it. And I spoke to people, and I think around 2005, 2006 was when India was really, really, sort of the economy was really booming. And people I spoke to, like lawyers, established lawyers I spoke to said that it depends on where you work. And if you can get into one of the top law firms in India, then frankly speaking, it's going to be as good an experience for you as being in Magic Circle, if not even better, considering that you're an India qualified lawyer. So with that, armed with that advice and also knowing what I wanted to do for my personal sort of reasons, I applied and I got into AZB and Partners, which is one of India's top law firms. Yeah, and that's when I returned to Mumbai and I started working there from 2006.
Right, but how did you find out about AZB? Did you have a whole, like an Excel sheet with all these names of firms on, or was there something that drew you into that firm? Because I will say I have been reading recently about AZB, and I found an amazing article written about Ziya Modi, the founder and managing partner of AZB. Yep. And I wondered if she may have been part of what drew you into the practice. And that was my hunch before talking with you today.
It is so interesting that you're asking me that, because I wasn't going to go into it. But when I was doing this 2 years of training straight out of law school, the building that I worked in, my office was on the 3rd floor. And I used to actually walk up the 3 floors and just go to this office. And on the 2nd floor was this office called Chambers of Ziya Modi. And I just thought, oh, what a fascinating name, Chambers of Ziya Modi. And then, of course, I did a bit of asking around. And so Ziya comes from an extremely sort of distinguished legal background herself, but she's entirely self-made. When I read about her, or rather at that time, it was more speaking to people because there wasn't so much of press about her at that point. I just loved what people were telling me. She just seemed like a complete breath of fresh air. And I thought to myself that at some point it would be so nice if I could work with Ziya. I used to think that just walking up the steps to this office, but never really consciously sort of thought it was going to happen. So when I applied to law firms in India, when I was, thinking of returning to India after my master's, I only applied to two law firms, actually. One was Ziya and the other was, at that time, it was Amarchand Mangaldas. I finally decided to start working with Ziya because when I met her, you have to meet Ziya, I think, to actually understand what a force she is. And it was just, there was no question, that I would not work with her after I met her and interviewed with her.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, she's a woman after my own heart because she's a legal entrepreneur. And the article written about her talks about legal entrepreneurship. And I think she really is a pioneer, inspiring a whole generation of corporate lawyers.
Is. I agree. She absolutely is. Yeah. She's just wonderful, leads by example. I consider her like a lifelong mentor, and she's just wonderful. Yeah.
So how was it working with her? What was some of the things that really stand out for you about her? Maybe a couple of things that, made you think, wow, I'm so glad I took the offer up that they offered me to join this practice.
She was all about heart, Catherine. And I could feel that right away. It's just sometimes you just form this connection with people. It just happens at a very sort of a gut level. And that's actually what happened for me. And I still remember when I was joining Ziya and I said, oh, Ziya, I'd love to join you, after she made me the offer. And I said, what about, where do I sign? And she said to me, oh, no, we don't sign anything here. Oh. And I said, oh, but then, how does that work? And she said to me, just go out and talk to people and they will tell you that Ziya's word is her bond. I did go out and I spoke to people. And I mean, she just had this wonderful reputation in the market for being someone who's she's just all about fairness and, she just does the right thing, and that was way back, even before I joined her. That's what people were telling me. And they said that if that's what Ziya is saying, you can just take her word for it. So that was before I joined her. And then when I joined her, there were a few things she taught me, which I took with me when I left AZB. And I think the advice that she would give all of her young lawyers was just take ownership of your work product, own what you're putting out there. And that means be responsible for the content, do your research, you make mistakes, you own up and you try and fix your mistakes, do everything you can to own your product. And the second thing that she taught me was, when you work, remember that there's nothing more important than the letterhead of the firm. And that again, when you really think about it, it just says a lot. And I think that those two things I carried with me when I left AZB. And then also in terms of setting an example for other women, especially, she's all about empowering women at the workforce. And I remember reading an interview about Ziya and it said, what about the proverbial glass ceiling, And she said, you just got to smash right through it on merit. And, and that's what she had done. And that's what she was training her young lawyers, her young women lawyers to do. And those kinds of things I heard them at the very beginning stages of my career, and they've really stayed with me. And a lot of other women lawyers, I suspect.
Well, I think it's amazing. Through you, we've just received a whole lot of amazing information about how to be a very good, not only a lawyer, but also a very good person in this universe. And you do still keep in touch with her?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, great.
And I mean, there's a lot of BD that happens between business development, Japan and India. And whenever so pre-pandemic, she would make at least one trip a year to Japan. And I would always meet her and, go out to dinner or something. And I've stayed in touch with her. And in fact, we will be talking about this later, but, I am actually in the middle of a career move right now. And she was one of the first persons I informed outside of Morihamada that I was actually going to be changing my job. So yes, I'm very much in touch. And, she's very much still cheering me on. And that actually means a lot to me.
Wow, that's amazing. And I guess too, that moving away from her firm to come to Japan, that's a story in itself. So tell us a little bit about that, because it seems to me moving from such an amazing mentor firm for you, right? A lady who you worked with and moving to Japan and all of that. How did that come about, that next phase? I'm so excited to hear about this because I haven't actually heard your story. So tell us how.
It's a long story, Catherine. So, I mean, I'm going to try and make it really short and interesting. But okay, so I worked at AZB from 2006 until 2009. So, like I said, the environment was just amazing. And Ziya, plus all the other lawyers I worked with at AZB, including very, very strong, wonderful women partners, there's no way I would have quit AZB, honestly. But I had also just gotten married. And remember, I married a shippy, the nature of whose work was that he would sail for about 6 months in the year. And then he'd be back ashore for, say, 2 months or a little more than 2 months. And then I discovered that it was kind of difficult being a full-time M&A lawyer and then trying to make the most of those 2 months that he was on shore leave. And in all fairness, actually, AZB tried its really, its best to balance out my work so that it is cyclical by nature, but there's not always going to be an entire 2 months of downtime. And after trying that for a little while and, for certain other personal reasons, I really decided that I had to invest in my marriage a little bit. And so I actually spoke to Ziya, I spoke to the firm, and they said that I could take 6 months off as a sabbatical and to just go with my husband and, sort of sail with him, really. And that's what I decided to do. And then to come back to AZB. Towards the end of 2009, I actually joined my husband on the ship and we sailed. Yeah, it was amazing. So I actually sailed with him for about 5 months.
Goodness.
And so he has worked for many years for Shosen Mitsui. And he used to sail at that time on their LNG carriers. So towards the end of my sabbatical, when I was actually getting ready to come back to AZB, he got this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to actually come to the head office of Shosen Mitsui in Japan for a year. Again, because having been together for 6 months, I just felt that I wanted that year of like being on the sea is very different from living as a couple on shore.
Sure.
And yeah, I thought that would be probably the only time that we would have to be able to do that. And so I went back to Mumbai, spoke again to AZB. And after that, 7 months, I actually properly quit my job at that point and moved to Japan to be with my husband for what was supposed to be a year. And that was in 2010.
Yeah, right. And we're in 2021 right now.
I think Japan does that to people, though.
Yes, indeed. Oh, my goodness. So you came here with your husband. What surprised you when you landed on shore in Japan?
So I had first been to Japan when I actually saw Japan first when I was sailing with him, because the ship would actually load in one of these ports in the Middle East. It was natural gas. And many of the customers were these big Japanese sort of energy companies. And so a lot of the discharging would happen in Japan. And we'd get a day. So my husband would be really busy during that time. And so I would get off in all of these little ports that you don't even know are there. And I just see a little bit of the terminal side and, very, very small parts of Japan. And it was all just very, very different for me at that point. And when I landed here, it was actually on Christmas Day of 2010. And so Japan was, of course, shut, for the Nenmatsu, for the year-end holidays. We just traveled. We went to Roppongi a little bit and everything. And I was like, this is really nice. And then when the year opened for business, in 2011, and my husband went back to work and I went to this supermarket to pick up stuff and everything was in Japanese. And I had no idea if I was buying milk, if I was buying yogurt, if I was buying sugar or salt. I was just looking for stuff with a picture of a cow on it. And that's what I thought was milk. And it ended up being like Nomu yogurt, drinking yogurt. So there were all these little, sort of teething problems.
Yeah.
And I decided that if I was going to be here for a year, to actually enjoy my time in Japan, I would really have to pick up the language. I checked and, thank goodness for the internet. I found this really nice language school in actually Minami Aoyama. And I signed up for classes within like 2 weeks of getting here. And then I became like a full-time student of Japanese.
How was that then, from working in your home country, being on the boat with your husband and then coming to Japan to be a student? How did all that feel?
Being with him on the ship was life-changing, I think, because there's a lot that we think as lawyers, we have it bad or we have it really hard. But being with him on the ship gave me a different perspective on stress. It also gave me a newfound appreciation for a lawyer's life. And I realized actually how much I loved being a lawyer when I was not doing it anymore. It was just a wonderful life-altering experience, Catherine. And just being there and, just seeing the stars from the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night. I mean, watching sunsets, because I was never a sunrise kind of person. So all of that was actually life-changing for me, both personally and, as I said, it also taught me to have an appreciation for my profession in ways I never thought possible before going on the ship. And then armed with that, when I came to Japan, I still thought it was just going to be a year of work. And there was always this understanding that I would go back to Mumbai and, sort of rejoin AZB. But being a student, actually, so I had nothing. I had zero knowledge of Japanese. And my classmates were students, they were basically Chinese and they were European students who already had studied Japanese for a couple of years. So I was actually sort of rushing to catch up. And I would joke at that point that I've come from, being a lawyer at AZB, the law firm, to being like a student at the AZB language school, because it was actually that difficult and that challenging for me, stressful actually. Yeah. But I loved it, wonderful teachers, wonderful group of friends. And then it was the opportunities that even trying to speak the language sort of 2 months into learning it opened up, I mean, people really appreciated the fact that you were even trying. And I think that kind of was a huge part in making us feel more at home in Japan.
I think it's really amazing too what you said, and I don't want to gloss over it because it's really critical that you loved it, right? Loved being a lawyer by not doing it anymore, right? So finding out more about yourself, that really was your true calling through doing something different, being on the ship, studying Japanese. So I think it's something that we probably don't really get to experience often. I think you've had an amazing experience there by being taken out of law for a moment and realizing I really love it.
Yeah. I was actually out of the profession for a little over 4 years, because it was 6-7 months of sailing and then a year and a half of Japanese and then 2 years of waiting to go back to India. And then my husband telling me, oh, there's just another extension of my contract. and then finally deciding that this was probably going to be like a much longer extension. And then, Morihamada happening and me just grabbing it with both hands when it did.
So Morihamada happening, that sounds like it landed in your lap, but I think there must be a little bit more to that. How did you go about finding that role? And how did it actually land in your lap later after you'd done all the work to find it? Tell us about that.
Coming to Japan, and for about 2.5 years while I was here. So as I said, 1.5 years was basically all about Japanese. And then a year after that, I was waiting to go back to India. So I actually wasn't even looking at, opportunities in Japan. But right around my 3rd year in Japan, the Japan-India corridor really started opening up. A lot of big deals started happening. And interestingly, it was actually a partner from AZB who had come here for a seminar who actually introduced me to some partners at Morihamada. And because I was still very much attached to AZB by virtue simply of not even working anywhere else. I met this partner for breakfast, and breakfast carried over into lunch. And he said, hey, I'm meeting some partners at Morihamada for lunch, and why don't you come along with me?
Oh, wow.
And I know today what a big deal that was for Morihamada, with an uninvited guest just showing up with this partner for a lunch meeting. But they really managed in style. And that's when I first met Morihamada. But even after that, it was like a year still of not knowing if I was going to be in Japan or going back to India. And I think finally 4 years in, when all parties knew, my husband knew, and I had realized that I was not going back. And then I kind of, just decided that, I need to really start looking for something here, because 4 years is actually a pretty long time to be out of the profession, especially as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. So there was already that initial introduction, via AZB. And that's actually how Morihamada happened.
Wow. So how did the person who actually employed you, right, the hiring partner, how did that person connect with the lunch? Is there some connection there? Is it the same person, or is it a different person within
It was
the
a different person. It was a different person, but actually my hiring partner, she's a wonderful lady, again, a wonderful lady lawyer in my life. So at that time, she was actually heading up the India practice at Morihamada. Morihamada kind of knew that there was this Indian lawyer sitting here who speaks a fair amount of Japanese and is not actually doing anything, It was all pretty organic, actually. And I met them, and it was just this wonderful office in a wonderful location. Oh, I have to say this, the first time, so I was always kind of a Shibuya, Minami, Aoyama kind of person because that's where my Japanese language school was. And the first time I actually saw Marunouchi was when I came for this lunch with the AZB partner. And I remember walking down Nakadori and thinking, man, would I love to work
it's
here?
It's beautiful. It is
amazing, right? And it was about autumn. And I mean, it was just glorious. I think, Catherine, it was serendipity. And I know that you've covered this in one of your previous podcasts, with Mindy. But I really think that this was serendipity at its best in my case,
It's fantastic. It's like the role found you rather than you finding it.
Yeah, but I also do like to think that I was probably subconsciously preparing for it without even knowing I was, because just studying Japanese and learning Japanese is actually what enabled us to even think about being here long term. It came, and when it came, I just sort of welcomed it with both arms,
It's fantastic. And so how has being in Japan doing the kind of law you've been doing and these soft skills, which I think are hard skills, really, language and culture, how have they made you the lawyer that you wanted to be?
So I am very much a work in progress. The thing about working with an international Japanese firm like Morihamada is that it's just a variety of work that you're able to do. So I am primarily an M&A lawyer, and the bulk of my experience is Indian or M&A. But being here allowed me to work on other jurisdictions, sort of, M&A, which I would not have had a chance to do otherwise. It's just constantly learning. So when you're interacting with lawyers from different jurisdictions, I think you actually get to understand a lot about the different styles in which legal advice is given. And, you just absorb so much without even realizing you're doing so by just looking at, different ways in which things are done. And even if you talk about just a firm like Morihamada, there's so many lawyers and so many different partners. And depending on who you work with, you're again imbibing all of these different things from people by osmosis almost, I think. And then actually the last few years, so since I had my daughter, I actually was working part-time. And it was a little difficult being a full-time M&A lawyer until, she was a little older. And so I then actually, Morihamada gave me this wonderful opportunity to work with the international disputes team on some, arbitration cases. And that was, again, something that I don't think I would have had a chance to do otherwise. And I just learned so much. And it was such fun for me, being like a more junior lawyer, working with lawyers with a lot more experience on something as fascinating as international commercial arbitration. So it's just taught me so much. There have been so many opportunities to learn and grow, and I'm just so grateful that I had that.
Wow, it's amazing. And I think you're one of those people who you mentioned before. You either come to Japan and you leave, or you come and you stay for a while. You can't get it out of your system. And so you've mentioned a couple of good things already, but are there another couple of one or two positives you would take away from working in that big law firm for the last, is it 8 years?
Yeah, it's 8 years actually.
Yeah, what comes up, one or two things that you'd take away from the big law experience?
It's interesting you should ask me that. And I've actually been thinking about this. And it's fascinating that when I was leaving, and when the news when people heard that I was leaving, I would get all these really sweet emails from my colleagues saying that we heard that you're graduating from MHM. And that Sotsugyo is used both to graduate, but it's also used when you leave like a workplace. And it really got me thinking, I truly am graduating, because in other sort of countries, you're leaving, you're moving on. It's only in Japan, I think, that you actually graduate from a workplace. And that says a lot, doesn't it? You've been there for a good amount of time. And I think you sort of absorbed a little bit of the DNA of the place. It's taught you, you've grown for the experience. And I think it sort of prepares you for your next step in life, much like a graduation does. And that's really what I'm taking with me when I take this next step into my new role.
That's right. And calling it sort of graduation, as you've said, is really a cultural thing, perhaps in Japan. You become the alum. You'll always be MHM's alum. It's a badge of honor. It's not that you're taking away or moving away from them. You are always part of them, but you are graduating and growing up, pulling your socks up and moving off to do something else, right?
I've just been told, just things like, oh, just make us proud. And I think that's so sweet, because you're so right. You are an alum, and I think they're cheering you on, and it's just wonderful.
Wow, super, super. Make us proud. Well, what are you going to do to make them proud? Because you have so exciting news to tell us about your next chapter. Tell us your juicy, juicy, exciting news.
Okay, so the juicy, exciting news. So I will be joining later this month on the 19th. Actually, I am joining a law firm called TKI, Tokyo International Law Office, and it's a boutique M&A, cross-border M&A firm. It's a little over 2 years in existence, and a wonderful, wonderful team of young and hungry lawyers. They are poised on this, on the cusp of this amazing growth story. The way I see it, I'm really just fortunate to just jump on board at the right time.
So there are things there that you'll be able to do in the new firm that you probably couldn't do before, that some doors may open for you in a different way?
Yeah, I think so. So I think the main difference for me is going to be that I'm actually transitioning back to a full-time position. So having been like a part-time, lawyer for the last 4 years since I returned from maternity leave, one thing is that I've actually not been able to do much M&A work because of the nature of the practice. And I'm now going back to a full-time role. So I definitely expect that I'm going to be able to be doing full-time M&A work. And this being a cross-border boutique M&A, I definitely expect more opportunities to come my way to do the kind of work that I love to do. And I think that there is a chance here to sort of also see the internal workings of a firm, which is not something that you always get a chance to do, especially at a non-partner level in big law. I would love to learn about the commercial side of things, the drive a firm, just learn more about the business side of a law firm. We always talk about the business side of things. We talk about moving in-house to see the business side of things. But I also think there's a business side to running a law firm, which I would love to, sort of learn and be a part of, which I think TKI will give me the opportunity to do.
Oh, that's very, very good, this perspective, right? You don't actually have to go in-house, not necessarily only in-house being a place for commercial learning about the business and the business side of things. And certainly I will tell you, Pavitra, running a law firm myself, you definitely learn about the business side of things. And I think that's going to be really amazing for you, and perhaps be an even bigger enabler to your clients if you're understanding the commercial way of running a firm as well. How do you think about that?
I definitely think you've hit the nail on the head, Catherine, because, when you're talking to clients, and especially, when you're advising clients on cross-border deals, right? A lot of the legal advice especially tends to be focused on the legal aspects, which is great. And of course, you want to give them the best legal advice. But I think that there's a whole practical aspect to it, which not only takes account of, for example, the cultural differences that you would know as a cross-border international lawyer, but also of the internal functionings of a business, isn't it? I mean, what are the economics that drive the client? What are the fundamentals of economics that drive any business, So I think learning things like that informs your decisions from a very practical perspective as a lawyer. And I definitely think that makes you a trusted advisor, rather than just a legal advisor. It makes you a more trusted and a more wholesome advisor. I mean, I would hope so, at least. And you can probably tell me about that.
I can see you pulling in your London experience and also your experience in India with AZB and then Morihamada. It's all coming together, culminating to be this kind of place where you can really shine. What's your dream for your new role?
For me, something that I'm in equal parts excited and nervous about, as I said, is that I'm transitioning back to full-time. And in a sense, it's brand new. Never had to do that. Also having a young toddler to raise. So for me, I think the initial few months is going to be all about finding that rhythm. I want to do it. And I think that that's a huge thing. I am so motivated and I'm so excited about this. And for me, I think it's sort of your mental makeup. And it's taken me a while to get to the point to say that I can be a mother and I can be a full-time M&A cross-border transactional lawyer at the same time. And once that sort of mental adjustment, mental switch has happened, I think it's a question of finding the right way of doing it. So for me, my first initial steps are going to be about that. The other thing I sort of want to also work on in my new role is definitely my Japanese skills. For example, in a place like, Morihamada, you have so many amazing bilingual lawyers, who are perfectly capable with both Japanese and English. And so many times when you're an internationally qualified lawyer, your role is more on the legal side of things than on the back end or the communication side of things. And so I do feel that my Japanese has become a bit rusty. And that's another immediate thing that I definitely want to work on. It's an opportunity to just grow with the firm. I'm just really excited to see what this is going to be like, because it's something that I've never had a chance to experience before.
It's actually very hard to fake excitement. And I think I can most definitely hear your excitement and motivation in your voice. It's totally coming through. That's really, really.
Can you also hear my nervousness, Catherine? Because there's a whole lot of that as well,
I think that's all part of it when you start something new. If you weren't nervous, such as I was when I started my own firm, there's something has to be there, a little bit of nervousness, but also excitement counterweights on that, I think, too, though. Yeah. And so what's going to happen? Are you having your daughter in childcare? Because I'm very interested to sort of move into how your routine's going to be.
Yeah.
You've those sort of things that you do in the first part of the morning to get yourself starting on your day. Right. So how's that going to work with your daughter and everything else? Tell us about your routine then.
So my routine is cliched as it sounds. I like to divide it into BC and AC, BC being before child and AC being after child.
Right.
And BC, it was whatever I wanted it to be, Catherine. And now it's literally how she decides it's going to be. So, morning, it's typically the morning and then the winding down, right? And my mornings are entirely driven by how she wakes up. And most days she wakes up and her first question to me is, before she even says good morning, she says, is it a school day today? and that's like every day. It's her reaction to my response to that question, which kind of sets the tone for the day. I mean, do I have to get into damage control mode, or is this going to be an easy day? Do I have to resort to bribery? So it's all of those things. So it's really all about getting her ready for school and getting her out the door by 9:00. So she goes to a Hoikuen. We thought about international schools, international play schools, and things like that. But I definitely wanted her to have the proper Japanese experience. And so we decided on a Hoikuen for her. It's been wonderful. She's picking up Japanese and she's teaching them a little bit of English. I can see her already blossoming in such wonderful ways.
Yeah, she won't forget it. She won't forget it when she grows up.
Yeah, I think so, because it's very foundational, I think. And then the winding down, really, I mean, she's so exhausted when she comes back from the Hoikuen because she doesn't sleep in the afternoons. And I think she gives her teachers, a real run for their money, just keeping her, out of mischief. So when she comes back, it's all about just getting her fed before she's too cranky and then getting her into bed. So in the evenings, usually my husband and I, because he has a full-time job as well, we just try and spend, even if it's 15 minutes together. I like to say that we talk about things, but I think most days we're just so exhausted. We're literally just sitting next to each other and saying nothing, but it's just companionship in whatever, form it comes.
Indeed.
And yeah, that's the winding down. So that, I think the arrangement with the Hoikuen is a lifesaver because she's there from 9 to 5. And I look at that as the bulk of my working day. And when I go back to full time, actually, I've sort of spoken to my husband about this because it's so important to have your support systems in place. And it's so important to have the people you're with on board with your, professional sort of life as well. And so he's kind of agreed to take the load over from 5:00 to say 8:00 or 9:00 in the evenings. I do bedtime and then I get back to working after that if need be. Although I'm hoping that most days I would not have to work beyond, say, an 8:00. I think that 9 to 8 is a good work day and you can get a lot done in that time. So this is what I've thought, and this is my plan A. Right. I do not have a plan B, but I'm just hoping that I can figure it out with, my husband's support.
Sure. And we look forward to hearing an update on that.
Sure.
Maybe during our Women in Law Japan phone calls that we have. That would be
absolutely.
Excellent. I'm just so excited for you. And so roundabout now, after being at your Italian restaurant and having one or two red or white glasses of wine, we would probably be going a little bit deeper. And I'm really interested to also know about traits or traits that you have that you're most proud of? And I'm thinking resilience, it really sounds like it's one of yours, but what would you say is one of your inner traits that you're really most proud of?
I consider myself to be a lifelong learner. I just think that there's so much I have left to learn. And I think that makes me really, really sort of curious, and it makes me ask a lot of questions, but it also gives me an amount of humility, which I think is good, I think. And I do think that that's one of my strengths. I think someone might think of it as weakness, but I actually look at it as awareness. I just like to learn. I like to ask questions. And if there's something that I don't know, I'm not scared to admit that I don't know. And I do think that that is one of my strengths. It's also great to hear you say resilient, because my professional path especially has not been the straight and narrow. I've had large chunks out of the profession, which I think could have been 4.5 years or something like that. And you think that, hey, I've just lost it. I don't have what it takes anymore. I think whether it was coming back, to Morihamada after the 4-year break, or whether now it's going back to full-time after my 4-year part-time work, I do think that I know that this is what I want to do. I love this job. And so that's another strength, just loving what I do, I think.
Yeah, and that's why I think you are resilient. And when you came back in after what is a long time, 4.5 years, you didn't softly make your way in. You landed straight into Big Four in Japan. And so that really does show about your inner strength, I believe.
I was also thrown into an Indian M&A deal at the time, which was in a sector I'd never done before. I think by the end of it, I felt I'd never been away from the profession at all,
And that's it, right? And it gives you that inner confidence that, you may be away from something for a little while, but you can come back to it and you're really not as rusty as you think you are.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because it's the basics, the fundamentals that you have. It's like swimming, right? You know it once, and when you get back into the water after years, you may thrash around for a couple of minutes, but then you're swimming again. And I really believe that's what it is.
Wonderful. My goodness. Is there anything that you've done so far in your life, Pavitra, that you would want to do again if you had another chance, or perhaps even something that you didn't do and you'd love to have it as something you can give it a try?
There's something that I definitely would love to do again, and that is go sailing, with my husband. I would love to do that again, Catherine. It was a one-off, but I would think that it was an experience that was life-changing. And if the opportunity presented itself again at some point, I would definitely take it up.
Wow. And I think also you've said that when you weren't practicing law, you knew that that was what you wanted to be. But if you were not a lawyer right now, if you think, I'm not a lawyer, what do you think you would be instead?
Okay, so there is the fantasy job, right? Which I know is never going to happen, but I've always been fascinated with the unknown and the mysterious. So I would have probably liked to have been a space explorer, or I would have liked to be like this sort of deep sea diver, equally exploring unknown spaces, underwater. That's the fantasy job. And then there's the real thing that I could see myself doing, maybe 20 years down the line. And that is to have my own little bookstore somewhere. A really quaint little store with full of these, lovely books and the smell of books. I would love that.
I've just got a visual of Notting Hill, that lovely movie.
Probably.
Right.
And if Hugh Grant would, Julia, I would want a Hugh Grant to walk through, of course. But,
Yes, I'd have him come through too. So, wow, that's really, really great. All of this information is leading me to think, what sort of information or advice you'd give to younger lawyers, because there must be some really wise things that you've been told along your path, and even maybe something that someone told you that really wasn't very good advice. So what about those kinds of things, and offering those up for some lawyers who are listening to you today who are sort of setting out on their path? Is there something there you'd like to tell us?
Okay, so I think for younger lawyers especially, I will actually just quote Ziya on this, and I will just sort of say the two things that I sort of took away from AZB. One was to own your work product, And the second is to really, respect the letterhead of the firm. And because I think that makes you the kind of lawyer you are. And especially getting that sort of work ethic as a young lawyer is something that you keep with you, wherever you go. But also the other thing I would say, and maybe not just for the young lawyers, but also, for more senior people, is we really should feel grateful for our jobs. There is a whole lot of, stress that we face, and we are in the services industry, and, there's lots that we cannot predict. You can't plan for things. But at the same time, I think, and this is something that I realized when I was sailing, we are so lucky to be working ashore, where you may find a lot of things challenging and difficult, but you have resources readily available at hand. My husband used to call me, when he was sailing. So communicating with someone on a ship is so expensive, right? Because they used to have these satellite phones, which are eye-wateringly expensive. And he would call me for like 15 minutes a week, and that was it. And so my entire schedule for the week would be planned around those 15 minutes that he said. He would say that he would call me. And I still remember this one time he called me 5 minutes late. And I spent the next 5 minutes arguing with him about how I'd shifted my meetings around. He was late, and now I only had a few minutes to speak with him. And he said to me, he said, can we just save this for when I'm back home? And that made me like even more argumentative. And I said that, also, you want to spend the 2 months you're on shore leave arguing with me about things? Let's just argue now and get this over and done with, It was only when I went sailing with him that I actually realized what he meant. Because when you're sailing and when you're away from, the nearest sort of landfall by a week or more, that's actually when you realize what mental health conditions can actually, how serious they can get. Because anything that happens ashore tends to get exponentially sort of amplified when you're in the middle of the deep seas. It's a very hypnotic experience, Catherine. I've seen, when people keep watch on the ship and there's just this inky blackness all around, and there's really nothing there, and you're left with yourself and your thoughts. It can be empowering, but it can also be a pretty scary experience, I think. And so we are actually very fortunate to have all of these resources as lawyers, even when we have all of these challenges with mental health and these stresses that we face. And I think that is something that we really need to feel a little grateful for.
Yeah. Wow. I also went just there visually on a ship and surrounded by darkness. And it's probably one of my fears is, you talked about deep sea diving before, and I'm like, no, because it's too dark under the water, and it really does make me scared. And so just saying that just makes me think as well about my own self, how, lucky and fortunate I am and how we are. And so having that gratitude and never forgetting that is really, really amazing. And I was going to ask you if you had the opportunity to call up your past self and offer a piece of wisdom to that past self, what would it be? But I think you may have already said it.
There's one thing I would tell myself, as if I could, and that would be, everyone says, don't take the all or nothing approach, and that I'm so guilty of having done that. It's like all or nothing. But I would tell myself to let go of that. But I would also tell myself, people say let go of all or nothing, but then what else do you do? Because an all or nothing approach, I think it's a sort of a character trait that you need to work on. It's not something that you just hit a switch and let it go, right? So had I known this way back, I would tell myself, yeah, try and let go. But if that's something in your character that you cannot change, then, at least just explore the in-between while you're deciding whether you want it all or you want less. Just that exploration is more important than the actual decision that you make. And I really wish I'd known that way back.
Oh, that is really, really good. Very good. Hopefully people are listening to that, right? You can't tell your own old self, but if you'd gone back and done that, that's really, really heartwarming to hear. Well, we're going to head towards the very end of today, unfortunately, but I do want to ask you, Pavitra, if there's anything that we've not covered that you wanted to mention, or something else that you have mentioned that you'd like to re-emphasize.
Not after this. I think I've said a whole lot about myself, actually, but I also think that you've done a wonderful job of just making this such an organic and, free-flowing chat.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's lovely feedback. And we are going to head into the final Super 6, or maybe it is actually Super 7 now.
Okay.
A quick fire round of questions that I ask every guest to wind up the interview. And so we get to learn a little bit more about another side of you that we haven't already heard. I think you are multi-sided. But the first question is, if I was to give you a million yen in cash, where in Japan would you spend it? Your favorite store or destination or both even?
Yeah, so I think at this point, it would have to be on travel. It's been so long since we went anywhere, in a meaningful way. And then I also look at it as a social cause, because I think the travel and the tourism industry has taken such a hit because of the pandemic. And if, you can just give back and just get that sort of industry back and up and running, I think it's a win-win.
Wow, yeah. Who would have thought that the travel industry, hotels, etc., would have been a social cause? You've called it out. I think we heard it here first. That is amazing. How about second question? Can you share a book or a podcast? I know you're into your books that you've been reading or have read recently that you would like to recommend to others.
I recommend Lawyer on Air to everybody. Of course.
Aside from that,
Catherine, that this is actually my introduction into podcasts. And the only podcasts I've heard in the past have been music podcasts. I've heard a lot of those. Books are something that I've always been interested in, and I love my books. I do, however, I think I find myself going back to the classics a lot. Something that I read again and again is my collection of sake stories. There's no time to read novels now, especially with my, job and my child. But I love to reread stories that make me think. And Saki is irreverent. He is just got a way of writing, which is fascinating. And I just love to go back and read his works. But one recent book that I read, and by recent, I mean by a living author, it's this book called actually Burial Rites. And it's actually about the last woman to be executed, part of the death penalty in Iceland. And it's actually a wonderful, wonderful book. It's not as grim as it sounds. And the writing is actually, it's just very evocative and it's very beautiful.
And I'm just thinking, Iceland had execution. I didn't know that. All right. That's going to be a book I have to read. It sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you for that. We'll put that in the show notes too. But is there a famous person or celebrity? Hugh Grant, maybe. But is there a famous person or celebrity you would love to meet or have already met?
It would have to be Bono.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would have to be Bono. I mean, I've just loved
you too.
Yeah. It would have to be Bono, I think. Yes. If it had to be a celebrity and if I could pick one among the many that I would love to meet, it would be Bono, I think. Yeah.
Maybe we need to tag him in the social media after this.
Oh, the power of social media, right? Yes. You never know.
Yeah. Exactly. And so what's on your bedside cabinet in your home that inspires you and why is that?
So at the moment, I of course have my sake, but I also have this book it's by this author called Khalil Gibran, and it's a book called The Prophet. And this was actually a book that I had read way back in high school when I actually won it as part of a debating contest. There were passages that he says there about being a parent, which I used to actually read out aloud to my mother when I was back in high school, and she used to hate it because it used to say things like, your children are not your children and they are born through you, but they don't come from you. And, it's basically things like that. And I used to just read them out just to tell her, just let me do what I want to do, whether you like it or not. And of course, she never subscribed to that philosophy. But now that I have a child, she gently reminds me of it every now and then. And I think that I could probably, I could probably do with a little bit of that approach right now in life. So I do actually read from, Khalil Gibran off and on. And I actually love the way he writes about the different parts of life, the different aspects of life.
Gosh, how exciting. I'm interested in all of these things you've been telling us. Thank you. And also one last question, something about you that a lot of people don't know.
Do you mean after this podcast? There's not a whole lot, Catherine.
There must be something. Up until now, I would have said, did you know I went sailing on a boat with my husband? I wouldn't have known that. Is there something else?
I think that I have to work really hard at being a good mother because it doesn't come to me naturally. But I think it's worth putting out there because I feel like sometimes there's this pressure on women to be maternal and to be the perfect mothers. and it's work. And that's not to say that you don't love your children, but all I want to say is that there's different styles of mothering, there's different ways of mothering. And just because you don't love your infant that comes bawling and howling the minute or the second you lay eyes on them doesn't mean that you're not a good mother. And you can work on it. And that's how it was for me. And that's something I did not know about myself. So clearly it's not something a lot of people know about me.
Wow, that's perfect. Really, that is perfect. Thank you so much. Well, Pavitra, we've come to the end of your very first podcast.
Yeah.
And you really have just had such a solid career that's meandered, but also going on a path that you didn't actually realize at the time. You've got all this commercial areas of law, and you've been leveraging your culture and language, Japanese language, as well as your native tongue. And all of those skills have come together. And I'm really getting the image of you being such a very empathetic lawyer who's really driven, but hasn't forgotten her essence of her upbringing. And I think that's really all of those things you can be and bring to your life as a lawyer. Thank you
so much, Catherine. Thank you so much.
And so I'd really like others to be able to connect with you. How can they do that? Would that be on LinkedIn or via email? How should we do that?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn would be great. And I will soon also be on the website of TKI from the 19th of October anyway. So that will also find me.
Okay, so that's 19 October, and we'll see you there on their website. Can't wait to see that.
Thank you.
So we'll put all of that in the show notes. So anyone who's interested in learning more about you and from you can just reach out to you. Is that right?
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I'll finish up here. We've had this fantastic conversation about so many things. I really thank you for coming on and being my third guest on this season 2 of Lawyer on Air. And I really thank you too for your honesty and openness and sharing your journey.
Thank you, Catherine. It's been a wonderful experience, and I really, really can't thank you enough for making this so easy and so enjoyable. Thank you.
That's great. So for my listeners, please do listen to this episode and subscribe to Lawyer on Air, and do drop us a short review, as that really helps Lawyer on Air be seen and heard by more people. And you can also actually go onto my webpage and leave me a voicemail. And I also really just love hearing people telling their own story about the podcast in their actual voice. And we're also now out on YouTube, so you can catch us there. The other part of information I'd love to give you is that I'm opening up a Lawyer Extraordinaire Mastermind in 2022 for women lawyers. So please check my posts on that on LinkedIn. And do go ahead, share this episode with any other legal eagle or somebody who you love in your community who would enjoy listening to it, to be inspired to live a wonderful lawyer extraordinaire life. That's all from me. See you on the next episode. Cheers, kampai, and bye for now. Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of Lawyer on Air. I really hope that you were inspired by the story you heard and that you discovered something new about women in the law. It's my passion to share my stories of amazing legal ladies, so please subscribe to the show so that you don't miss future episodes. And if you can think of even just one person to share this episode with, that would make my day. I would love to connect with you, so jump on over to LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter or Insta, where you can find me. The links are in the show notes below. Well, that's all from me today, and I look forward to seeing you right here on the next episode of Lawyer on Air. Cheers, kampai, and bye for now.